Thank you so much for joining us for our song and story today. We are dressed up just a little bit for our song. Nathaniel, what's the name of our song? Come and go with me to my Father's house. Mother's house, I will wear a robe. I will wear a robe. I will wear a robe. In my Father's house, I will wear a robe. There'll be joy, joy, joy. A crown in my Father's house. In my Father's house. In my Father's house. I will wear a crown in my Father's house. There'll be joy, joy, joy. Come and go with me to my Father's house, to my Father's house, to my Father's house. Come and go with me to my Father's house. There'll be joy, joy, joy. Jesus is the way to my Father's house, to my Father's house, to my Father's house. Jesus is the way to my Father's house. There'll be joy, joy, joy. There will be joy in Jesus' house. It will be a wonderful day when we get to go and see him and wear a robe and a crown and be with our friends in heaven together. We hope to see each of you there. Ready for a story?
Yeah.
This is called Bonnie's Big Day. Who do you think Bonnie is?
What? Big horse?
Oh, I think you're right. It is by a man named James Harriet. James Harriet was a veterinarian. A veterinarian is an animal doctor. It was illustrated by Ruth Brown. One sunny morning, early September, I drove to see old John Skipton at Dale Close Farm, since he had telephoned to say that one of his cart horses was lame. Do you know what lame means?
Yeah.
It means that his foot is hurt, that he's not walking good. As I got out of the car, the untidily dressed figure of the farmer came through the kitchen door of Dale Close. John always seemed to look like a scarecrow, and today was no different. He was wearing a tattered, buttonless coat which was tied round his waist with a string. His trousers were much too short, and he hurried towards me. I could see he was wearing socks of different colors. One was red, the other was blue. By working hard when he was a young man, Mr. Skipton had saved enough money to buy his own farm with its handsome stone house. He had never married, and because he was always so busy looking after the sheep and cows on the hill, bringing in the harvest from the fields and picking the apples in the orchard, he'd been much too busy to worry about himself, which is why he always dressed in such very old clothes. The horses are down by the river, he said in his usual gruff manner. We'll have to go down there. He seized a pitchfork and stabbed a big pile of hay, which he then hoisted onto his shoulder. I pulled my large Gladstone bag from the car and set off behind him. There's Mr. Harriet, James Harriet. He was the veterinarian. It was difficult to keep up with the farmer's brisk pace, even though he must have been 50 years older than me. I was glad when we reached the bottom of the hill, because the bag was heavy and I was getting rather hot. I saw the two horses standing in the shallows of the pebbly river. They were nose to tail and were rubbing their chins gently along each other's backs. See, they're giving each other a back massage. Beyond them, a carpet of green tuff ran up to a high sheltered ridge, while all the clumps of oak and beech blazed in the autumn sunshine. They're in a nice place, Mr. Skipton, I said. Hey, they can keep cool in the hot weather, and they've got the barn when the winter comes. At the sound of his voice, the two big horses came trotting up from the river. The gray one first, and the chestnut one following a little more slowly, and limping slightly. They were fine, big cart horses, but I could see they were old from the sprinkling of white hairs on their faces. Despite their age, however, they pranced around old John, stamping their enormous feet, throwing their heads about, and pushing the farmer's cap over his eyes with their muzzles. Get over! Leave off, he cried. Do you want the horse? Have you got your monkey, Nathaniel? He pulled out the gray horse's forelock. This is Bonnie. She's well over 20 years old. Then he ran his hand down the front leg of the chestnut. And this is Dolly. She's nearly 30 now, and not one day of sickness until now. When did they last do any work, I asked. Oh, about 12 years ago, I reckon, the farmer replied. I stared at him in amazement. 12 years? Have they been down here all that time? Aye, just playing about down here. They've earned their retirement. For a few seconds he stood silent, shoulders hunched, hands deep in the pockets of his tattered coat. They worked very hard when I had to struggle to get this farm going, he murmured. And I knew he was thinking of the long years those horses had pulled the plow, drawn the hay and harvest wagons, and done all the hard work which the tractors do now. Look, brother. I noticed that Dolly was a bit lame when I came down with their hay yesterday, you said. Luckily, I come down each day. You mean you climb down that hillside every single day, I asked? Aye, rain, wind, or snow. They look forward to bringing a few oats and some good hay. I examined Dolly's foot and found an old nail embedded deep in the soft part of her foot. I was able to pull it out quite easily with a pair of pincers and gave her an anti-tetanus injection to eliminate any risk of later infection. That would hurt if you got a nail in your foot. Climbing back up the hill, I couldn't help thinking how wonderful it was that old John had made the long journey to see the horses in all weathers every day for 12 years. He certainly loved those great animals. A thought struck me, and I turned to him. You know, Mr. Skipton, it's the Derby show next Saturday. You should enter the mares in the family pets class. I know they're asking for unusual entries this year. Perhaps you should only take Bonnie, since Dolly's foot will be a bit sore for a few days. The farmer frowned. What on earth are you talking about? Go on, I said. Take Bonnie to the show. Those horses are your pets, aren't they? Pets, he snorted. You couldn't call one of those great big clodhoppers a pet. I've never heard of anything so silly. When he got back to the farmyard, he thanked me gruffly, gave me a nod, and disappeared into his house. Hey, brother. Hey, brother. Hey, brother. Hey, brother. Hey, brother. The following Saturday, it was my duty to attend, sit down, buddy, so they can see the pictures, Derby show as the vet in charge. I'd spend a pleasant time strolling around the showground, looking at the pens of cattle and sheep, the children's ponies, the massive bulls, the sheepdog trials in the neighboring fields. Then over the loudspeaker came the following announcement. Would the entrants for the family pets class please take their place in the ring? There you go. Let's look at the next page. I was always interested in this event, so I walked over and stood by the secretary who was sitting at a table near the edge of the ring. He was Derby's local bank manager, a prim little man with rimless spectacles and a pork pie hat. I could see he was pleased at the number of entrants now filing into the ring. He looked at me and beamed. They have certainly taken me at my word when I asked for unusual entries this year. The parade was led by a fine white yanny goat, which was followed by a pink piglet. Apart from numerous cats and dogs of all shapes and sizes, there was a goldfish in his bowl, and at least 5 rabbits. There was a parrot on a perch, and some budgies having an outing in their cage. Then, to an excited buzz of conversation, a man walked into the ring with a hooded falcon on his wrist. Splendid! Splendid! Cried Mr. Secretary. But then his mouth fell open, and everyone stopped talking at the most unexpected sight. Old John Skipton came striding into the ring, and he was leading Bonnie. But it was quite different man and horse than I had seen a few days before. John still wore the same old tattered coat tied with string, but today I noticed that both his socks were the same color, and on his head, perched right in the center, was an ancient bowler hat. It made him look almost smart, but not as smart as Bonnie. She was dressed in the full show regalia of an old-fashioned cart horse. Her hoofs were polished and oiled. The long feathery hair on her lower limbs had been washed and fluffed out. Her mane, tail, and forelock had been plaited with green and yellow ribbons, and her coat had been groomed until it shone in the sunshine. She was wearing part of the harness from her working days, and it too had been polished, and little bells hung from the collar. It quite took my breath away to look at her. Beautiful horse. Mr. Skipton, you can't bring that great thing in here. This is the class for family pets, cried Mr. Secretary, leaping up from his chair. Bonnie is my pet, responded the farmer. She's part of my family, just like that old goat over there. Well, I disagree, said Mr. Secretary, waving his arms. You must take her out of the ring and go home. Old John Skipton put on a fierce face and glared at the man. Bonnie is my pet, he repeated. Just ask Mr. Harriet. I shrugged my shoulders. Perfectly true. This mare hasn't worked for over 12 years and is kept entirely for Mr. Skipton's pleasure. I'd certainly call Bonnie a pet. But, sputtered Mr. Secretary. Then he sat down suddenly on his chair and sighed. Oh, very well then, go and get in line. So John turned and led Bonnie to the place right in the middle with the other competitors. On one side of them was a little pink piglet, and on the other side, a turtle. It was a most curious sight. Look how big Bonnie was next to all the other little family pets. The task of judging the pets had been given to the district nurse, who was very sensibly dressed in her official uniform to give an air of authority. Judging this class was always difficult, and when she looked along the line and kept seeing the great horse, she knew it was going to be very difficult indeed. She looked carefully at every competitor, but her eyes always came back to Bonnie. All the rabbits were very sweet. The falcon was impressive. The dogs were charming, and the piglet was cute. But Bonnie was magnificent. First prize goes to Mr. Skipton and Bonnie, she announced, and everyone cheered. As the rosette was presented, a man came to take a photograph for the local newspaper. It looked as though the great horse knew all about her prize as she posed there, dignified and beautiful. John, too, stood very erect and proud. But unfortunately, every time the photographer clicked the camera, Bonnie pushed the bowler hat over the farmer's eyes. It was the mayor's way of showing her love, but I couldn't help wondering how the picture would come out. After the show, I went to Dale Close to help John undress Bonnie, and I went with them down the hill to the field by the river. As we approached, Dolly came trotting up from the river, whinnying with pleasure to see her friend and companion again. Her foot is quite healed now, I said, noting the horse's even stride. In the gentle evening light, we watched the two old horses hurrying towards each other. Then for a long time they stood rubbing their faces together. Look at that, said old John with one of his rare smiles. Bonnie is telling Dolly all about her big day. Bonnie takes first prize in the family pets class, the Derby and Holton Times. Bonnie's Big Day by James Harriet. Thank you so much for listening to our song and story today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.